Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Caspar. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Okay.
Russell, my friend, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm also very sad and very envious. Hearing and
Why is that?
Well, you get to do all the business trips that are fun, get to meet these awesome people, and I'm sitting here. Well, it may look like it's something exciting, but actually I'm sitting at home in my home office doing my work. And
Brilliant, man.
To be honest, I was completely shocked to a certain extent, and I'm very humbled as well. I saw the lineup for these couple of days of BPM forum in Krakow, and it's not just the names, it's the titles and the topics. They are so cutting edge, they're so deep. I didn't realize really that there's so many people that really go into that level of topics around BPM. Because in business, you're always on the practicability of things and get things done fast and the budget's tight. But the lineup was awesome. Please tell me, what are your impressions on site of these keynotes? What were your takeaways? Halfway through the first day.
Yeah, of course. We're just getting started. So first of all, there's almost like 300 participants here. So that is absolutely fabulous. It does show that the topic around BPM is in increasing demand, I would say. And let's be very clear about that. When we talk about BPM in this setting, it includes also things like process mining, which seems to take up quite some bit of space on the agenda. Nevertheless, it's great to see so many academics and people from the business come together and share what it is that they're doing research on. That's what it is. This whole BPM conference is about sharing with each other, what are we doing development and research on, where are we going with this, and that has interesting perspectives actually. And I had the same perception last year, and so far it's not different. Is that there seems to be a bit of a gap between what are we researching and how can it be applied at real life organizations. And of course, this is an academic conference, so we're looking at things now that might be common good in a year or two or three or four from now. But let me take you through a couple of highlights. I think the opening keynote speech was an absolute killer. It was brilliant. It was about ethics in BPM. Now that is a rabbit hole that we can go down in, and then we probably won't ever get out. But it was an eye opener for me, at least. Normally
covering every angle. I think there's an angle we haven't really looked into, my friend.
We haven't. But I think that we need to do a crash course in philosophy and psychology first before we do that. But it was absolutely brilliant. How do you solve ethical dilemmas? I'll just give you an example that they gave in the keynote speech as well. Imagine that you're doing process mining on credit score assessment, and you find out that based on the analysis, there is a certain demographic that tends to default more than other demographic groups. And the question now becomes, do you pursue this analysis and you risk discriminating an entire group of people, or do you take that piece of data out because you don't have any overriding mechanisms in place? And at the moment that you have, so if you scale this back to like 10, 15 years ago, or small organizations, they still have people to validate the results of a mining analysis or a big data analysis. And they can see, hey, listen, wait a minute, we see this, yes, we understand this, but we need to ignore this and don't automate it into a procedure. Because at the moment that you start to automate those kind of things, what AI typically does is the bias simply gets automated, and you keep discriminating against certain groups of people.
Absolutely.
And at the scale of
the analysis and the execution both have ethical constraints. And I think around mining, there's always been this discussion around how deep do you go down, how far do you start monitoring people on a, let's say, personal level.
Exactly.
The works councils have always been onto that. But I looked into her some of the slides she has around ethics in BPM, and I was also blown away because it just took BPM to a different level. So it really
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
How deep we are in this day-to-day getting things done mode. But then say, hey, let's take a step back. So as you said, on coming from the philosophy and the ethical side of how do you manage to get sustainable and ethical dimensions into your day-to-day doing? And here, I think we definitely need to somehow dig into that more in our covering every angle, because that is something where in other topics we've been talking about, the company culture is so vital for this whole topic, where BPM can drive and change company culture, but also on the other hand, how good is your company culture set up that it can actually deal with BPM in an ethical way?
I completely agree, and maybe we should reach out to this professor and see if we can get her on the podcast as a guest. We can go down that rabbit hole. I think that's a wonderful idea. So and then after the keynote speech, and of course you have a network break, and the keynote speech ran long as usual, because there were of course a lot of questions in the audience. And then after that we had a series. You can choose 3 different tracks around the fundamental, around technical, around management type of topics. And even there, I'll just highlight 1 or 2 things that struck me most, and I have to read from my iPad from the notes I took, is what we looked at, for instance, object-centric event logs. I mean, object-centric process mining is, of course, the new kid on the block with a tremendous potential, but in this case, we're also looking at frameworks for event-to-event mapping, or object-to-object mapping, or even event-to-object mapping. I mean, even that part was quite interesting. And even though all of these presentations are like 10-15 minutes long, and they simply describe what it is that we're doing, where are we now, without going into too much technical detail. So another one was around decision modeling, so CMMN models, where you do variant management, and they are trying to come up with a new way of documenting the problem that you have with a standard process and its variance. I mean, this is a headache for almost every BPM tool out there. How do you deal with the fact that you have multiple routes through a process? And so CMM is obviously case management, so case management mapping or modeling. If you go to a municipality or you go to a hospital, you know that there's a certain sequence of steps that need to take place, but they're not necessarily in a predefined order or sequence.
I think a good example is always this, exactly, and that's one thing where, I mean, you have customer journeys where you try to plot along where do they interact, and it's never one sequence of events. And in sales as well, I always said it's like a bucket that has to fill up and overspill so that people buy. But when and what you fill into the bucket to get the people to the brink of decision, that is I'm not saying random, and the sales guys know when to say what and do which pitch or propose or do anything like that. But it is, to a certain extent, it's not such a clear sequence. There's so many examples where I also think that the static value chains and activity flows for a level of industrialization in production manufacturing absolutely makes sense. You have 10,000 sequences, you need to streamline them. But as soon as things get more innovative, more individualized, based on a patient that has his own requirements and his own sickness and his own symptoms, you have to deviate from that. And I think this is covered too little in a formalized way. Yeah, and that's
absolutely.
That's why that's super interesting. We need to dig into that. That is an angle we need to look into as well. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, there is like a zillion angles we need to look into. And that's why I think that we're going to have a long and prosperous podcast, Russell.
Okay.
Because there's nothing we can't uncover. The last one I'll share with you, because we want to keep this one short, is how do you deal with conformance checking when you're talking about object-centric process models? And why do I bring this up? Object-centric means that you can discover and show and analyze parallel path in an end-to-end process. So just take procure to pay as an example. Procure to pay starts typically with a purchase order, and then you might approve the order, then it's sent out to the vendor, and then in parallel you might have multiple goods receipts, and then you receive an invoice, and the invoice is based on the information from the purchase order and the goods receipts. So there's a lot of different dependencies that are not strictly sequential, meaning that if you look at case-centric process mining, it is a single flow, a single case, where if you have two goods receipts, they might be shown as sequentials, while in fact they might be in parallel. And object-centric process mining solves that part. That's fine. And just before you interrupt, wait, just give me a second. How do you deal with the conformance checking? So how can you actually compare that type of discovery with a static model that might show sequentiality, because it doesn't show that you have multiple goods receipts. It just shows you need to do a goods receipt, and that can be one or multiple. Now back to you.
And that touches into another aspect I saw a lot on the agenda, and that is all around looking at these events and processes as like a graph, from a graph perspective. And what I like about that, especially with the compliance topic, is if you look at the way with big data, they've been doing fraud detection with graphs on a graph base. It's about identifying in a chaotic setup of objects and relations, which could be really big, identifying certain patterns of interactions. And I think that's why this, as you said, this object-oriented view and compliance checking, and there's a lot of talks about graphs. I think there's a lot of power there where you do not have a static model that has a sequence, but you are talking around the existence of objects and their relations in a specific timely sequence, but in a, let's say, constellation, that is then that can be used for compliance checking or performance management, or even for this CMM where you say this is fine, you know, in the context of taking care of your patient. And this is so different, so much more advanced than the static. I have a dream of a business of a static digital twin of my business, although the reality is so more dynamic. And there is that.
Absolutely. And just for a second, you sounded like a 21st century Martin Luther King. I have a dream. We have a lot of dreams, Russell, and we're going to uncover all of them in the podcast.
So what's coming up for you next? I saw that there's an industry forum as well. So it's not just theory. There are a lot of contacts and contributions in direction of industrial applications.
Yeah. So the industry forum typically has a couple of organizations that present what they've done so far. So that's going to be interesting. And there will be a couple of more of those tracks with short presentations on very interesting topics. I'm gonna follow a BPM I think it's a BPM track, and we'll report on that when I get out of them. And what I also have lined up is a couple of short interviews with a BPM professor in Indonesia that's here, and I did a guest lecture for her during COVID. And I have another professor from Budapest University on BPM as well, that I'm going to do a very quick interview, and then I'm going to push those out on our LinkedIn page of the BPM podcast, and then we'll take those and we'll incorporate some snippets of those in the next episode that we're going to be shooting tomorrow, I guess.
Okay, good. Well, try to make some. I saw some super pictures of the setup there, and the university, and the building, and everything. So make sure that you get some time to take some shots of that as well, so I know what I'm missing. You know.
I will. I'll rub it in. Don't worry.
Good.
All right. Thanks, man. And I'll talk to you later. Yeah. Thanks very much. And we'll speak again tomorrow, Russell.
Speak to you tomorrow. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.